Hi, in this video, we're going to continue talking about the reasons or the grounds for the revocation of license of an association not for profit. In the previous video, which was the first part of this particular video, I've already talked about 5 possible reasons on the basis of which an NPO's license may be revoked by the SECP, that is the Commission, and in this video, we're going to look at the remaining reasons. So without further ado, let's start talking about these remaining reasons. We've already discussed D and E, which you can see in the slides, and now let's talk about F, which is the 6th possible reason. So the 6th reason on the basis of which the NPO's license may be revoked by the Commission is that the number of members at some point in time reduces below 3. Now, this particular rule is quite easy to remember because if you remember that when we were studying about the criteria for being granted the license by the Commission, then in that situation we had studied that an NPO has to be registered as a public limited company, which is obviously stated in Section 42 of the Companies Act 2017. And in that video where I talked about this criteria for license, I also mentioned the fact that an NPO will obviously not be a public listed company, and that obviously means that it's going to be a public unlisted company, as we have already studied when we studied the types of companies in another video. And when we talk about public unlisted companies, then we have to remember that the minimum number of members in a public unlisted company is 3. So that just means that this rule is replicating that other rule that we've already talked about in another video. So if you keep this point in mind, this particular reason is going to be very easy for you to remember. Okay, now let's move on to discuss the 7th possible reason on the basis of which a company's, that is an NPO's license, may be revoked by the Commission. So on the slide you can now see that this particular rule is quite detailed. That is, there are 5 conditions listed as the part of this rule. That is, if any of these 5 conditions is violated, then the license may be revoked by the SECP. So let's go through these 5 conditions one by one. So the 7th ground, that is the 7th reason for the revocation of license, is based on 5 further subcategories. The first one says that if the company is conceived or brought forth or is or has been carrying on unlawful or fraudulent activities. This one is pretty straightforward. So I just read that out in case somebody is just listening to this recording and not watching it. So if the company is conceived or brought forth, that is, if the company is originally created or is somehow later on, once it has been created, it starts carrying on some sort of unlawful or fraudulent activity. And of course, we all know that the range of unlawful and fraudulent activities is quite wide. So you can think of any possible unlawful or fraudulent activity that the company, that is the NPO, may possibly be engaged in, and that is going to be a valid ground for the revocation of that NPO's license. So moving on. The other possible reason listed over here is that the company is run and managed by persons who fail to maintain proper and true accounts, or they commit fraud, misfeasance or malfeasance in relation to the company. I read that out quite fast because I do not really prefer reading out from slides. However, like I said, I do that in case somebody is just listening and not watching. So once again, this ground is pretty simple and straightforward. If a company is created, even if it's not an NPO, it has to run and manage their accounts and maintain those proper accounts, and of course do so honestly and truly and not fraudulently. So if there is some sort of fraudulent activity as regards the accounts of the company, then once again that is going to be a valid reason for the SECP, that is the Commission, to revoke that NPO's license. So in this particular reason, please don't worry too much about the words misfeasance or malfeasance, because they just relate, they're basically legal terms which more or less indicate fraudulent activity on behalf of the persons who are managing the company. So like I said, don't worry too much about these legal terms. You just have to remember the main point that the company should be maintaining proper and true and honest accounts. Other than this, the third one is that the company, if it is run and managed by persons who are themselves involved in terrorist financing or money laundering. Now, this is a very important one because this is also a very common one. Why? Because terrorist financing or money laundering, these are precisely the sorts of activities which people try to hide by creating an NPO. So essentially what they do is that NPO is created for the purposes of giving a cover to their illegal activities, that is terrorist financing or money laundering. So just remember that these are two reasons that you have to remember as examples on the basis of which an NPO's license is going to be revoked if the commission discovers that that particular NPO, not only is it personally involved in terrorist activity or money laundering, but that if it is run and managed by persons. So that is the key point to remember from this one, that it's not essential that the NPO, that is the association not for profit, is itself engaged in some sort of terrorist financing or money laundering, but that it is enough if the persons who are managing and running that NPO are also involved in some sort of terrorist financing or money laundering. Okay, the next point is that the company, if it is managed by persons who refuse to act according to the requirements of the memorandum or the articles or the provisions of the Companies Act, or fail to carry out the directions or decisions of the commission or the registrar which have been given to them in exercise of the powers conferred by the Companies Act. So essentially what this particular part is saying is that, as I've already mentioned in my other video, is that Section 42, Section 43 and Sections 44 of the Companies Act are obviously the relevant pertinent sections as far as associations not for profit are concerned. However, it's not just these sections that contain all of the relevant rules that NPOs have to comply with. In fact, if you look at these sections, you will see that they specifically mention that the Act, that is the Companies Act, gives power to the SECP, that is the Commission, to make further rules and regulations, and the associations not for profit that are granted a license under Section 42 are then bound to comply with those further rules and regulations that are created by the Commission. So in short, the Commission is empowered by the Companies Act itself to create those further rules and regulations, and one example that we have looked at and talked about is the 2018 SECP regulations. So yes, as far as the fourth subcategory for this seventh ground for the reasons relating to the revocation of license is concerned, just remember that the company has to be managed by persons who agree to comply with the memorandum and the articles of association of the company, that is the NPO. And in addition to that, they have to comply with the provisions of the Companies Act 2017 as it now exists, and of course as it may be amended in the future by the Parliament, and of course they have to comply with the SECP's regulations as and when they are issued. Finally, the fifth subcategory as far as this seventh ground is concerned is very simple, and it simply states that if the company, that is the NPO, ceases to be in business for 1 year, then once again this may be a ground for the revocation of their license. And okay, now moving on, there is one more point related to the reasons for revocation, and this is the eighth ground, that is the eighth reason. So far we've looked at 7 different reasons for the revocation of license, and the seventh reason, as we've already seen, contained 5 subcategories, and finally we're going to discuss the 8th possible reason on the basis of which the Commission may revoke an NPO's license, and that is again a very open-ended category, by the way, because it does not state a specific particular reason and just states that if the Commission so decides, that is if the Commission, the SECP, feels that the NPO's license should be revoked because it is just and equitable to do so. And by the way, equitable is once again a legal terminology, that is a legal word which you may not know about. However, just remember that over here you can presume that equitable simply means fair. So if the Commission feels that it is fair to revoke the NPO's license, even though none of the other conditions, that is none of the other reasons that we have already talked about, is applicable to that particular NPO, even if those are not applicable, not relevant, it does not matter. If the SECP so feels that the license should be revoked nevertheless, so it does not matter if that particular NPO does not fit any of the reasons that we have discussed, that is the 7 reasons that we have discussed, it is going to be enough for the SECP to revoke the license by claiming this 8th possible category, which is, like I said, very open-ended. And if the Commission decides that the license should be revoked and that the reason for revoking the license is simply that the SECP thinks that it's going to be fair that the license should be revoked, then this license will definitely be revoked, and the category under which the license is going to be revoked is this 8th category. So this brings me to the end of the reasons, that is the list of reasons on the basis of which a license may be revoked. I just want to mention one more point that is extremely important, which is that before revoking the license, the Commission is always going to give a notice in writing of its intention to do so to the relevant NPO, so that that NPO is going to have an opportunity to explain themselves and provide evidence to prove that, for instance, if they want to prove that the Commission's arguments or reasons are ill-founded, then they can do so. Right, so this is the end of this video. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the effects of revocation of license.